V'hine b'chinas Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Now the concept of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh together on the same day. Ukihine vadai b'chinas Shabbos ein kamohu. The concept of Shabbos, certainly there's nothing like it. Rosh Chodesh, there's nothing like it on Rosh Chodesh. Ari b'Shabbos yam malchus. Because on Shabbos the concept of Malchus goes up above, is elevated, and receives from the concept of Yisod Abba, of the parts of Abba as it's in Zer Anpin. And the dew that drips from Atik, like was explained in the previous paragraph. The concepts of Malchus as it goes up is not just into Zah, but it reaches from the higher Partsufim as well. And because it goes up like this, in Shabbos you can't have any action or purification. Only the revelation of the supernal pleasure, which is not the case in Rosh Chodesh. But there's one concept on Rosh Chodesh that Shabbos does not have. And the concept is because we already explained that in the 6 days of the week, the Malchus, which is the concept of speech, receives from the emotional attributes, and also the intellect shines into the speech through the includement into the emotional attributes first. That is, that Malchus receives from Zah, which is in general the 6 sides of Atzilus, so to speak. Omnam berosh Chodesh. So that's during the week. However, on Rosh Chodesh, Malchus shuhu hadibur, Malchus, which is the speech, mikabelis me'achachma bina atzman, receives from chachma bina themselves, not through the midos, who can derech marshal ba'adam. And this is, for example, in a person, sheyesh beis mini dibur. There's 2 concepts of speech. Ha'alef kishad dibur mikabel mehamidos. The first is as the speech receives from the emotions, shmedaber lahasik davar ha'ahuv lo, that you speak in order to achieve and grasp that thing which is loved by you. Or you speak about a concept that you're afraid of, or other attributes like beautifying or overcoming and so forth. So the speech then receives from these emotions, even though you're talking with intellect. That is the intellect that's enclosed within that emotion. But it's not the intellect itself, it's the emotion that has intellect in it. You cannot compare wisdom as it is enclosed and grasped within the emotions to the essence of wisdom itself, which is high and exalted above them. However, there are times where speech receives directly from the essence of intellect, not through the emotions. For example, if you're speaking words of pure intellect, that then the speech does not receive from the emotions. There's no particular emotion involved in describing in this idea. It only receives from the intellect itself, which is the source for emotions. So too in the service of Hashem, the speech in prayer, even if you're praying with love and fear, nonetheless the speech is receiving from the emotions regularly. Then, and in such a state, a person is in existence, that there is somebody who's loving, that they're in a state of nullification and love, but they exist. But in comparison to the concept of prayer is the study and speech in the words of Torah, that when you learn in a state of nullification, like the statement that I will place my words in your mouth, I am the Mishnah itself that is speaking in your mouth. So the speech receives then directly from the supernal wisdom, that the Torah comes out from wisdom and not from, so to speak, not from the emotions. It's rooted in the Chokhmah, it comes down straight from there. Which is much higher than the emotional attributes. Look what it says about Itamar, the son of Aharon. Itamar is Lashon Itmar, to speak. And Aharon is going to be the concept of, I guess, higher than emotions. I guess from the Koach of Ma or something. I guess at any rate, Itamar ben Aaron represents this idea of speech that comes directly from Seichel. That Mishkan of the Edus is Yud-K. What's the testimony is Yud-K. And when the speech, which is Malchus, receives from Partzuf of Abanim themselves, Imkein Meir HaEdus, then it shines this concept of the testimony. And that's the concept of Torah, which is the Edus. Like that's called the Aron HaEdus. Mishkan HaEdus. So in Torah Bebechinas Bittul, and that's the concept of Torah study with a self-state of nullification. V'nikra Itamor or Itmar. And I guess, and as opposed to Dibur or some other concept of word that implies speech. V'dibur ha'maskil basi legani nispoer. And in the Maamer Basi Legani it explains Lekach Sheshua HaKadosh Baruch Hu Achar Chatzos Laila, that's why the Holy One, blessed be His pleasure, is after the midnight. To have a comfort from the destruction of the temple, specifically through those who study Torah at that time in the midnight. And this is also the concept of the revelation of the state of nullification of wisdom, of the strength of what? Which is higher than the concept of love. And similarly is the difference between the love in Shema and the bittul of the Amidah of Shmona Esrei. That in the reading of Shema, the speech receives from the concept of, and you shall love, Aval Shmona Esrei called Mamadaka, but the Shmona Esrei is like the soft, still voice of Eliyahu that Eliyahu heard. Shadibur Mekabel Mebichinas Bittul, that the speech receives from the state of nullification, not from emotions. V'zeu inyan Rosh Chodesh, and this is the concept of Rosh Chodesh. Shaz HaMalchus Shu Adibur in Atfela Lahamidos. So then the concept of Malchus, which is the speech, is not secondary, is not subservient to the emotions. Shu Bechinas Zeranpin, which is the concept of Zah, the Kabel Mehen, to receive from them Val Yadon, and through them Hashpa, any flow. Kim Shemikabel es Hamochin but rather it receives the concept of intellect from Chochmah and Bina themselves. And that's why it's called the new month, or from the language of new and renewal, that it receives new intellects from Chochmah and Bina themselves, that from there is the main concept of renewal. Because within the concept of Chachma, of wisdom, rests the infinite light. That he alone enlivens all the works of creation every day, that the Or Ein Sof rests first in Chachma. So if you're receiving from Chachma, you're receiving from that state of renewal of the infinite. Look what it says in Zohar Emor, that it's true that she is the daughter, she's my sister, the daughter of my father, where it talks about the concept of the Chiddush of Yom Tov, over Shabbos and so forth, and how it's a hashpah from Ava and so forth. And in this, there's a greatness to Rosh Chodesh, that Shabbos, that is not on Shabbos, that on Shabbos Malchus receives everything through Zeir Anpin first. It's only that on Shabbos, Zun, both Za and Nukva are going up into many high levels. That's much higher than Mochin. That receives on Rosh Chodesh. It receives higher than the Mochin. Yes, it receives, Malchus receives through Za, but it's going up higher. It goes all the way up to Keser. They go up to the level of Ava themselves, not just receiving from it. And then it's called the love of pleasures. Look what it says on the Maamar Rashi Amatos Moshe Yesod Abba Mamshich Perashi Amatos Yud Beis Gvulei Alochson, that Moshe draws down from the concept of Yesod Abba into the heads of the tribes, the 12 borders of diagonals, Koach HaDibur, into the, he brings down into them that they are the 12 diagonals, this ability of speech. Zehadavar, that this is the thing, these are the words that you should, that Hashem spoke. V'hine Yud Beis Shvatim, now the 12 tribes, L'negdam hu Yud Beis Chodashim, corresponding with that are the 12 months. So drawing down into the matos is similar to Rosh Chodesh. If so, the heads of the tribes are like that each one is the head of the month. That on each Rosh Chodesh you have an elevation to receive from the intellect of Chochmah Bina themselves, not to Patzuf Zeir Anpin. And this is the concept of that Moshe spoke, that he draws down from the concept of wisdom itself, to the heads of the tribes, which are like the 12 heads of the months. And that's why Rosh Chodesh is not called in the pasuk the day of action, the day of the week. It's only specifically the 6 mundane days that are called that that on the 6 days of the week, that's when Malchus receives from the speech, which is speech receives from the 6 sides of Zeir Anpin Nikra Yom HaMaisa. It's called the day of action. Shemehamidos hu koach haispashtus bebechinas maisa. It's from the emotions that you have the ability, this concept of spreading out into the action to elevate and so forth. Which is not the case on Rosh Chodesh. That the speech receives from Chachma Bina themselves. And Chachma Bina, their ways are higher than the concept of action. Therefore, it's not called the day of action. That therefore speech does not receive from the source of action, from the midos. but nonetheless, it's still permissible to do work. That since you're drawing down, it's not an elevation upwards, but it's hamshacha downwards from chachma bina into the dibur. So the speech does go down and conduct itself downwards into the concept of action. Like it says, your kingship is the kingship of all worlds. Therefore, it is permissible to do work. Even though chachma bina themselves are higher than the concept of speech, of action. They're higher, chachma bina are higher than the concept of action. Because the action and the world, that's from the 6 sides of parts of Zah, not from chachma bina, not from Abba Ve'ima. But the chachma bina, they're the 2,000 years, so to speak, that the Torah is before the world. Meaning beyond the olam, beyond the Maisa. Nonetheless, since they're already drawn into the concept of Malchus, as it is in its place, meaning to say Malchus is not elevated, but they go down to it. So the Malchus then is still in the state of being the source for the action below. Which is not the case on Shabbos, that it's the elevation of speech to its root and source. Now this concept that it's not secondary to the Zah, is specifically in Rosh Chodesh, Nizbor. So it's explained, because this, that Malchus is subservient to Zah, that's the concept of the moon getting smaller. Which is not the case before the moon was made small. You had 2 luminaries. Both of them were equal. Therefore, in Rosh Chodesh specifically, which is the holiday of the moon, corresponding with the moon, therefore that concept of its source, that it's not secondary to the sun, it's not second, which corresponds with the Zah. It's not secondary to it, therefore it's equal to it. It receives directly from the Mochin themselves as well. In this main concept of Rosh Chodesh, this main concept that Malchus will be equal or even higher, that will be in the time to come. As is written, Vaya that it says the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun.